There's been a lot of debate around the world on the origins of the CCP virus, also known as COVID-19. In particular, whether it comes from a natural origin or whether it might have leaked from a laboratory. The federal government did research into this and it came out inconclusive. But now there's a very large investigative project just released that details the full history of the research being taken place at this laboratory in China. Involvement of individuals like Dr. Anthony Fauci, the NIH, and others, and also, suggesting very likely that it may have come from a lab origin. Now, to talk with us about this research are the two researchers themselves. We have Jeff Carlson and Hans Mahncke. They're the hosts of Truth Over News. Jeff, Hans, real pleasure having you on Crossroads.
Great to be here. Thanks for having us, Josh.
So, you both did this infographic really laying out the entire timeline of the Wuhan Institute of Virology and this, how this virus situation really came about. And I think you show a lot of evidence that maybe a lot of people have heard on the periphery but never really put it together. Can you tell us first off, what was the idea behind making an infographic of this type? Jeff, what's your take on this? Why'd you do this?
The infographic really sprung out of our work. Very early on, Hans and I got interested in this whole topic. There'd been this vast promotion of the natural origins theory, and it was so one-sided, it smelled wrong to us. And as we began to dive into this, we began to get overwhelmed with the details. And so we slowly began to construct this ever-growing database of information that really was sequenced best by time so that you could see these strange events taking place. And as that progressed and grew larger, we began to talk about, hey, maybe we should be getting this out to the public. And that's really the genesis of it.
And Hans, I'm curious, as this whole picture came together, was there like an aha moment where everything just clicked? What was this experience like putting this together?
There was several of those moments. One that I recall very distinctly was when we started looking at all the research publications on bats and coronaviruses and manipulating them and all that before the pandemic, right? And you can put them all in the timeline and they're all there. And then what just jumped out at us is that these guys were just getting better and better at manipulating viruses over a period of sort of 10 years. And the timeline really kind of shows that very clearly. There were other moments as well. You had Fauci's secret teleconference, which we detailed in the timeline sort of point by point, minute by minute, right? And when you see it, suddenly sort of things jump out at you at, oh, wow, they did know that before that guy mentioned it, and, things like that. So it was a few of those moments.
So in other words, the timeline shows the context of their public and private statements in terms of what they knew about, what they had been working on, and maybe discrepancies between that and how they were messaging things to us. Is this accurate, Jeff?
That event really was, what it showed us was the creation of the natural origin narrative. And how that narrative was created in direct conflict with their private statements. Go ahead.
Let's dig into that, because you mentioned in particular this teleconference that Dr. Fauci had. I guess first of all, what was the context of that? Why did you see this as such a big deal that you would even list out the timestamps of it and really go over the whole thing? What was the significance of that?
Well, this started slowly, and what happened was Hans actually, there was a dump, a Freedom of Information Act, and Hans found this particular entry, this particular email that really caught our attention, and I believe it was from Christian Andersen, and it's where Andersen was saying that if you look closely, the virus actually looks engineered. And from there, I started doing a little bit more digging, and we realized, wow, there's a whole story behind this conference call that we need to dig into. And that actually, there's a separate timeline that is dedicated entirely to that at the bottom of the major timeline, simply because it's so important. And, I guess what viewers should know is during this teleconference, two participants, Christian Andersen and Edward Holmes, said that they were 60 to 70% and 80% certain that the virus had leaked from a lab. Now, bear in mind, this is happening while they're formulating the actual origins of the natural origin narrative that would then be pushed through the media. And we have some proof of that. Maybe, Hans, you can talk about the NASEM meeting.
Yeah, Hans, I'm interested. Tell us about this.
Sure. So on the same day that the teleconference took place, where they're talking about the virus being, 80% sure that it came out of a lab, right? On that very day, they completed a draft of what's called the proximal origin letter or article, which they later published. And that article is really, and I'm sure viewers have heard this, proximal origin article is probably the most cited article anywhere in academia now. And that's what they intended it to be. They wanted that to be the anchor of the natural origins narrative. And the point is, they got it ready. They finished the draft on the same day they were saying that the virus came out of a lab. 2 days later, there was that NASEM meeting. So that's the National Academy of Sciences. And what happened there was that the White House asked NASEM to look into the origins. And NASEM, perhaps foolishly asked Fauci to come over and sort of talk to them about it. And so this is 2 days after Fauci was told that the virus is most likely engineered. And then Fauci goes over there and tells him, natural origins. And all the same characters who were on the teleconference also show up at NASEM, and they tell NASEM the same thing, that the virus had natural origins, whereas privately, of course, they were saying the opposite.
Wait, so
and
let's
really,
look. Go ahead.
I just want to jump in here. This is a hugely important point. And, as they're privately on a teleconference saying that they think the virus came out of a lab, within, that same day, they dropped the proximal origin article. And 2 days later, they're literally pushing the group that's going to go before the White House to tell them where they think the virus originated. And they're telling them the exact opposite thing and telling them that, hey, the virus was a natural origin. They told them nothing of their private teleconference beliefs and simply pushed the natural origin narrative. So that really blows apart any argument that group slowly evolved over a period of weeks or months into believing that it was now a natural origin. In other words, that they had sort of privately dismissed the lab leak. 2 days later, they're pushing the natural origins narrative. So that whole argument is just blowing out the window, and you can see that there's two very dichotic statements being made almost simultaneously.
Wait, so let's dig into this a bit more. This is crazy. You have these scientists, the ones who were telling us that it was a natural origin, didn't leak from a laboratory, but privately they're saying that they're 70, 80% sure that it was in fact a lab leak and not just a natural origin. It's bizarre. Do their conversations, these private conversations, show anything about why they have this discrepancy between their private conversation and what they're saying publicly? Does it show that maybe they, through discussion, determined that it was natural origin, not a lab leak? Is there anything suggesting that?
Well, kind of 95% of those emails, the Freedom of Information emails, are redacted, as usual in these cases. And of course, we all want to know what's behind those redactions. But the little bits of information that are there do tell us quite a bit. So there's at one point, one of the participants wants to shut off the call and just reconvene with a much more smaller group with Fauci and just 2 or 3 others. So obviously they weren't happy where the discussion was heading. So they had that sort of side conversation, and then they went back into the main conversation. So we can glean a little bit from that. There was also Freedom of Information requests over in Europe, because some of the participants are from Holland and from the UK and so on. And then you can see that their redactions are slightly different, and you can kind of start piecing it together. And they very clearly at some point talk about something that, well, they don't mention the word engineered, but from context, it's pretty clear that that's what they're talking about. And then Farah, the co-organizer of the conference, Jeremy Farah, the head of the British Wellcome Trust, which is the world's biggest pharmaceutical trust, he jumps in and says, let's not discuss this here, on email. So there's quite a bit there. And I think our timeline, sort of, if you go through it, you'll see the little bits of evidence that tell us what they were discussing at the conference. But I think the most important point about knowing what it is they were discussing is how it all started, because it started on January 31st. And that was something happened that evening, on Friday evening, and that sort of triggered the whole thing, and that kind of set into motion from there. So I think the trigger tells us really what the whole thing was about.